Hi everyone, welcome to another video. I'm David, I'm a New Zealand immigration lawyer, and today I want to talk about the current update and status of the New Zealand Business Investor Visa. Now, as some of you may be aware, the New Zealand government is undergoing somewhat of a refresh of the business migration policies. We're now essentially at phase 2. Phase 1 was a rehashing, or at least a rejigging of the policy around the Active Investor Plus category. That's where you invest 5 million or 10 million. It's called Active Investor, but it's somewhat of a passive investment, really, by comparison to this phase 2, which is the Business Investor Visa, BIV for short. And the Business Investor Visa is coming out this month, being the November in 2025. It's the category whereby they allow people to operate a business in New Zealand and obtain residence and a permanent residence through that process of owning and operating a business. Phase 3 will likely come next year, and that is something like a startup visa. We don't know what that's going to be called or how it looks just yet, but we do know that there's work in progress on a startup visa. So essentially, there will be 3 tiers for New Zealand business migration investment, where you pretty much put your money somewhere and you hold that. You don't have to stay in New Zealand too many days out of 3 or 5 years. Level 2, this business investor, where you're much more active. And level 3 being a startup case. So I'm going to talk about this business visa in terms of what we understand about it. The applications are opening soon. I'm going to give you 3 essential sections to this video. The first one being about eligibility, how you could be eligible for the visa, what's required essentially to become eligible. Number 2, we're going to talk about the process. And I won't go into immense detail, but I'll talk about the process generally so you can understand from a sort of a bird's eye view, what's required and how long it might take to go through this process. And thirdly, I want to talk about my thoughts about this. So stay tuned for the end, where I talk about what I think about this visa, what I think the prospect is of the success of this category. So in terms of eligibility, fundamentally, there are some pretty straightforward requirements that you either are investing 1 million or $2 million. Okay, so 1 million is for the standard process, whereby you would run a business for 2 years. And essentially they're saying if you are investing more than 1 million up to 2 million, you can fast track the process and you can run your business for only 1 year before being eligible. So that's the funds requirement. But there's also a requirement for how you came about your money. New Zealand government wants you to evidence the source of your funds. This is all in relation to international anti-money laundering legislation, etc. But it's also just related to the policy here being that they want business investors who can show that they are actually the ones who have built up their wealth themselves. They are bringing that skill into the country. So what they're looking for essentially is, how did you earn it? Did you earn through salary, being in a management level position? Did you run your own business? Can you show tax returns from your business? If you're coming from a country where evidential documentation is not so strong, you may have difficulty with this, but generally speaking, they're looking for tax returns. They're looking for a reasonable sort of timeline of events showing how you have earned and saved your money. Now, the money does not have to be sitting in a bank account. What happens is you will nominate an asset, but we'll talk about that when we get to the second part of the video. We talk about the process. The other fundamental requirements for this visa is that you have a minimum level of English. It's not so high. They're asking for the equivalent of IELTS 5.0. If you're doing the Pearson's or PTE test, it's something like 35, I think. Generally speaking, that would be conversational and business level English that you would be required to run a business in New Zealand anyway. But yeah, you would need to take a test. Family members, secondary applicants, children, they have a little bit more lenience and flexibility on that. In most cases, if they do not meet the requirements, they can pay for pre-purchased English language tuition, but principal applicants need to meet that requirement of English. There's another requirement that you can demonstrate business experience, at least 3 years of business experience that you can show, business or senior management experience. The policy has some specific wording around that, but what they're saying is they don't want people who are essentially career salary employees trying to come into this category. They're looking for people who have experience running business. The requirements for the business. Now, this is another section of eligibility, but it's not so much eligibility about you. It's about eligibility for the approval of the visa. You have to select and nominate a business that you're going to buy. And I'll talk about more about this in this second segment about process. But you're essentially going to select a business that you want to buy, and the business must have been already running in New Zealand for 5 years. It must already have 5 full-time employees. There's a requirement that you'll be taking it over and then adding value by running the business successfully and adding another worker. All right. So these are the sort of the requirements for the business that you're sourcing, is that they have to have those criteria already in place. It's not the case that someone can set up a business and then sell it to you. It really has to be something that's genuinely been running for 5 years already. And the money that you invest on that has to be, in a sense, an arm's length transaction. Now, I've got some thoughts about how this is going to pan out, which I'll talk about later. But let's say you're buying a business for $1 million. If that business includes real estate assets, so for example, you're purchasing, let's say a factory or a warehouse, and that the land and building is part of that, the $1 million that you're investing cannot be made up of the real estate. So the real estate is a separate issue. You would be looking at purchasing the going concern or the business, which is already running at that $1 million or $2 million. And then, of course, if it does have real estate assets attached to that, you can purchase that separately. And I suppose in line with that, if you're borrowing money for the business as well, that could be something which is happening additional to the investment, but that minimum investment requirement is for the business, for the invested business. So look, those are the fundamental criteria that are required. And, if you think that you're interested in this category, those are the things that you'd want to be looking at first, and obviously taking things further only once you feel like you could satisfy that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the process and how it works, applying for this visa, and going through the system, so to speak. So essentially, the very first thing you should be doing is confirming your eligibility for this category. And how would you do that? If you're obviously doing it yourself, you'd need to spend some time understanding the policy and the background and everything. But we would usually recommend to talk to somebody who's a professional lawyer or an immigration advisor. The eligibility confirmation essentially is just to let you know that you can proceed further without wasting too much money and time. Most good lawyers and advisors will have a service whereby they spend a little bit of time up front assessing your documentation, checking your base requirements, because there are additional base requirements for any visa, which is health and character. Making sure that you don't have, medical conditions or criminal convictions that would preclude you from being eligible, and as well as looking at your background, your financials, your everything, to let you know that it's okay to go forward. So that's the very first thing you should do. Then once you've got that in hand, you need to then source a business. Now, this is something which I have some thoughts and feelings about, but essentially what this category of business visa requires is that you nominate a business before you can apply for the visa. You will need to source a business and then conduct due diligence on that business before entering into a sale and purchase agreement. And then with that sale and purchase agreement, although albeit conditional, you can then go ahead and lodge a visa application. So what do we mean by due diligence? Well, obviously, if you're a business person, you understand how that works. You want to verify the business assets, the business cash flows. But in terms of Immigration New Zealand, the policy does actually specifically note that they require an accountant and a lawyer to verify by way of a confirmation, a New Zealand accountant or lawyer to verify that due diligence has been conducted. Now, okay, to what degree Immigration New Zealand is going to dig deeper into that to find out what you have done and how you have verified that the business you're buying is suitable for you. We don't quite know yet because the applications have not started. They're starting later this month, and we'll see once we start seeing some applications going through. But essentially, the policy requires that a lawyer and an accountant will confirm that has happened. And just out of interest, the lawyer who confirms due diligence cannot be, or who processes the transaction for the business, cannot be the same lawyer who assists you and acts for you in terms of the immigration application. For example, if you came to my law firm, I'm the specialist on immigration. I would be handling your visa side of things. And of course, you could use another one of the lawyers, my partner or one of the lawyers in that team who does business transactions, and they could act for you in terms of the business transaction and the other requirements. But it couldn't be me. It can't be the same lawyer. From reading of the policy, we feel it's okay. It's the same law firm as long as it's just not the same individual lawyer. So you've sourced a business, you've found something you want to buy. It's an arm's length transaction. There's going to be some question about valuations of the business and whether someone's paying fair value, because of course there's always going to be a risk of people paying too much or too little. Immigration New Zealand is not supposed to protect you from paying too much for something, but they'll be wanting to watch out for fraud or businesses that have been, let's say, marked up or artificially manufactured to sell at that price point. I'll talk some more about that later because I have some thoughts about that. But essentially, look, that's the process. You confirm your eligibility, you source a business, you enter into a sale and purchase agreement, and then, of course, once that's ready, you go ahead and lodge the visa application. Immigration New Zealand is likely going to prioritize these applications because, of course, you have a contract in place, you want to settle on the business, and that they'll process your initial visa application up front. What's going to happen is that you'll be granted an initial period of a visa, during which time you will have to then transfer your nominated funds, settle the purchase of the business, and then begin the operation. And then, of course, once you can clarify and confirm that you've done that, there'll be a balance of the visa that's granted to you at that point. Now, this is where the devil's in the detail, because in past business category, entrepreneur categories, and also with the investor categories, there are some rules about how you transfer your money through. You're going to make sure that whoever is working with you, the lawyers or advisors, that you follow their instructions and make sure it's all done through the proper channels, banking system, that it's not Bitcoin or, carrying gold bars across the border. So immigration is going to want to make sure that the funds that you have nominated are the funds that are being used for the business purchase. For example, if you nominate your asset back home, which is let's just say you have a rental property that you rent out to people. It's an investment property. It's worth $1 million. You are nominating that property for the purchase of the business. Once you've been granted your initial visa, you have to then sell that property, use those funds to transfer in through the banking system into New Zealand to purchase the business. And for this reason, we'll have some pretty, shored up advice for our clients about to what degree they prepare themselves before they go ahead with this application. Because, of course, you don't want to be stuck trying to sell a house that's on the market for too long. So, look, that's sort of the general process about how it works. The total time frame from beginning until grant of a visa is really going to depend on a number of factors. Who you're working with as a professional to support you is one of those factors, but for the most part, it's going to be how quickly you gather all your documentation together in the first instance, and then how quickly you can source a suitable business in the second instance. The visa application itself is likely not to be a huge hang-up. It's really that period in between of sourcing a business, confirming that it's going to be eligible, being satisfied with it, conducting due diligence, right, and all of that process. Now, what are my thoughts on this new category? Look, I have loads of thoughts on this new category that I probably cannot say publicly. These are things that I would say privately to my clients about, techniques or strategies or approaches for how to go about this, which are going to be, let's say, bespoke to you and your circumstances. But in terms of my overall view on this, I think that they have missed the mark a little bit on implementing this policy. The current government has done a great job by reshaping the structure of the active investor plus category. That's the 5 million and 10 million category. They've adjusted that in such a way that it's actually quite attractive and straightforward for people who are at that level of wealth who can comfortably move their money into New Zealand. Because if you have 5 million New Zealand dollars, roughly 3 million US dollars, if you have 5 million New Zealand dollars to invest, you just need to place it into managed funds, which are reasonably secure according to whatever is your risk profile, and then wait for 3 years, and you just spend 21 days in the country, and your residence is confirmed. There you go. You're a permanent resident for the rest of your life. Whereas with this one, if I'm comparing to the old entrepreneur category, I would say, look, there's some wonderful changes made. They've made it a lot more streamlined and straightforward, and it's likely to be a lot easier in that sense of visa processing and eligibility for residence later on. Where it's kind of gone wrong, in my opinion, is requiring somebody to actually have a business already in place with a contract and a sale and purchase already in place before even lodging any visa application is going to be, in my opinion, a big detractor for a lot of people, right? Business people are comfortable generally taking measured risks, but, when you're thinking about moving your family across the world, to the bottom of the world, to New Zealand, and maybe you've never done that before, maybe you've never been to New Zealand, maybe you've never moved countries, it's a big deal. Maybe you have a spouse and children. This is a really big deal. You need to be able to plan. And I know from my own personal experience, it does require a lot of planning to move countries. So requiring someone to choose that business up front is going to mean that whoever's the principal applicant or the business leader in the family or whoever it is going to have to come to New Zealand, spend some time, perhaps even go through a few failed deals, before they finally come across a business that's going to work. And then, of course, you lodge an application. But what happens if the application takes a little bit longer than the vendor likes? Or what happens if the vendor is not happy entering into a sale and purchase agreement with someone who cannot settle on the business within 1 or 2 months? Maybe that there might be a requirement for delayed settlement, because, of course, the deal has to be conditional upon or subject to the grant of the visa. Now, most people, when they purchase a business as a going concern, the sale and purchase agreement will be conditional upon something. Due diligence is one thing, but also maybe they need to obtain financing or approval of their solicitor, et cetera, et cetera. But those are things which can usually go through reasonably quickly, and can be estimated and understood before going ahead. Whereas in this case, we're relying on a government department who, let's just put it in a friendly way, has been less than consistent throughout my entire career. So although the business migration branch and the specialist immigration officers in that team are, let's just say, a little bit more highly trained in terms of business than other general categories, still there's inconsistency and it can take time, and sometimes there are hassles, sometimes issues come up that delay the process. So this is the number one thing that I think is kind of a miss of the mark. I would have thought that, much like the old entrepreneur category, they would have the ability for an applicant to lodge an application based on their profile, their background, their documents, their nominated assets, and then to have an approval in principle for a period of time that would allow them to then source a business. I would have thought that would have been a better way to go about it. And potentially that could divide that application up into 2 parts, 2 separate application fees. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Look, there may actually be a very good reason why the government has done it this way, which I'm unaware of. Maybe it's above my pay grade. This is just my thought on that. The other thing that is my thought about this, which I think is something we'll only really see once we start getting into the applications, and that is that New Zealand businesses that are for sale, let's just say a business that is valued at $600,000 or $700,000, and let's just say there's a business owner who's happy to achieve a sale of $600,000 or $700,000 in order to retire or move on to the next phase of their life. And now, of course, a migrant comes along and says, look, I want to buy your business, but I want to buy it for $1 million. Well, great. I'd love to sell my $700,000 business for $1 million. But I do wonder what kind of little private deals are people going to propose to balance that difference there. And because, look, let's be honest, when you're working in the business field, things can be very flexible and very fluid. Business transactions will often have let's say a high, or I don't want to say inflated, but let's just say an increased sale price. But at the same time, that increase is balanced out somewhere else by way of, like, let's say if there's work in progress or other asset base that's discounted, or right. So deals can be structured in many, many different ways in order to either maximize the purchase price for the vendor, or to minimize the tax payable by the vendor, or for many, many reasons, right? Sometimes vendors will leave some cash in a deal. Sometimes they, value certain assets higher than others to structure the tax. And this is all very legal and very, common. But I do wonder just how those transactions are going to be negotiated, where you have businesses that are not quite worth the 1 million, or maybe they're worth 1.5, but they try to get it up to the 2 million, or But anyway, this is just something that I see can be happening, because New Zealand is a small country after all, and it's not the case that we just have thousands of multi-million-dollar businesses always available for sale. Yeah. The other thought, the last thought, the final thought that I have about this category, which is that I think pertinent and for everyone to consider, is that there are restrictions on the types of businesses that can be purchased. And I think in a sense, this is a good move by the government, because, the New Zealand public doesn't necessarily want to see suddenly an influx of migrants coming into the country to run, retail or hospitality venues. That's the public face. And I think this is where, if I may, this is where anti-immigration sentiment comes from in, new world, modern countries, where multicultural societies, people are not so much against the different cultures and migration generally, but sometimes if you have it right in front of you, all of a sudden loads of new migrants coming in, suddenly owning your corner shop that you like to go to on a daily basis, it's a change in your environment that people sometimes don't like. Now, of course, there's no issue, generally speaking, with individual people. But the government is sort of trying to move away from just that kind of retail shop type of investment and business migrant. So I suppose on the one hand, that's good. But on the other hand, actually, these are the ones that we need, right? New Zealand really needs help in the retail and hospitality industry, right? If you walk up and down the main street of Auckland, Queen Street, you'll see it. You'll see empty shops. And it's pronounced since COVID. And we do need, in a sense, a revitalization of that part of the industry, of the economy. So I don't know. I guess my thought is that if I was involved in the reference group trying to discuss on the policy, these are comments that I would have been making. Like, hey, I get it. I get why you want to shy away from that. But hang on a second. Isn't that the kind of business owner we want? Business owners who come in and do it hard, running a shop or a local cafe or restaurant, they help actually keep New Zealand's tourism economy going. They help keep people enjoying their lives, right? Because we love to have different foods from different nationalities. We love to have shops that are open at different hours of the day to satisfy our needs. This is just my thought. I think it might have been a missed opportunity in that respect. But again, like I say, I'm not the policymaker. I'm just a lawyer trying to help people achieve their goals. So take what I say with a grain of salt. So anyway, that's my thoughts, and that's the latest update from our side about this business investor visa. If anyone's interested in this, I definitely do recommend looking first at your eligibility, as I said, and making sure that you don't, jump into an application when you might not actually be eligible. That's the very first thing to do. So again, like I say to everyone, every time, my advice is to get advice. And feel free to follow us for more, tips and advice and videos about New Zealand immigration. See you later, everyone.